So, welcome to the Leadership Japan series podcast. We have Yasuaki Mori, an old friend of mine who's got a long experience in leading in Japan, as our guest today to talk about leadership. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. Interesting. I've never done a podcast before, so I'm very, very nervous.
Oh, well, it's simple. You just talk into one of these mics here, and it all sort of magically, it all sort of works.
Try and sound intelligent. Okay.
Well, that won't be a problem for you. So if we think about, leadership has challenges anywhere, and of course there's going to be challenges in Japan. But before we get into that, talk a little bit about your background, the things that you've done, companies that you've led here or outside of Japan. Give our audience a little bit of an idea of your background.
Okay. I guess maybe I'm really. How you describe me? I guess I'm Japanese, but not really, or I'm a gaijin, but not really. So I'm not quite sure where to start off with. Anyway, start off with my background. I was born in Canada, and my dad was doing helping sell Japanese products through Jetro in Canada, probably motorcycles, I think. So I started off with that. And then it was there for 5 years. And then the dad decided, I don't want to live in Japan. I want to live in somewhere else. Found a job in Geneva in the United Nations, and took over the family to Geneva without knowing the vaccination requirements and all the other stuff that happened. So he landed over here. I think we were quarantined for a little bit, maybe. But anyway, started off interesting. And so I spent 20 years there altogether. My dad was there 36 years. So I went to high school there, then to college in the U.S., and then started my career. So I started off in the United States in Silicon Valley, and then moved back every 3 years, kind of got bored. And then the company moved me around from between the U.S., Europe, U.S. And then suddenly the chairman of the company says, "You're Japanese, right?" I go, "Yeah." And then before I could say, "Yeah, but," I was sitting in Japan on a 3-year expat contract. And then suddenly 20 few years later, I'm still here.
But who was that with that 20 years with which company were you with?
It was a company, I'm in the semiconductor industry, and usually semiconductor industry is known for people turning around every 2-3 years, but I only been with 2 companies. One was AMD, an American company, a chip company, and another one is Infineon Technologies, a German-based spin-off from Siemens. And so in the first part of career, I spent a lot of time between the U.S., Japan, U.S., Europe, and then with Infineon, focusing on Japan, but being a global company, I spent a lot of time in the U.S. as well as Europe, et cetera.
So you came here to run AMD in Japan?
Yes.
All right. And how many years did you do that?
I was there for 3 years. I came around AMD Japan. Well, I was the number 2 at AMD Japan.
Right.
And so basically, I guess bring in a different kind of sales was the objective, rather than taking the customer is always right to, hey, the customer's business model is changing, or we try to help change a business customer model for the business that they're in, and then went from there, and then I was recruited to take over Infineon, which is a larger company at that time.
That was Infineon in Japan? In Japan,
yes.
Great, okay. Well, thank you for that. Yeah. And how long were you with Infineon?
I was there for 18 years. So in my previous job and role at AMD, I was hopping continents every 3-4 years. Here at Infineon, I stayed on the same job for about 17 years, which was a long one. So but of course, focusing on developing the business and the organization. One of the challenges was that when I joined it was a 50-50 joint venture between a Japanese company called Fuji Electric and Siemens. Infineon was being spun out from Siemens, so they had to recuperate the 50-50, make it 100% Siemens, and then make Infineon. But what was the issue was the employees were seconded from Fuji Electric, and the managers were seconded from Germany. So you can imagine the interesting situation where I was parachuted in to drive the changes there.
And must have had many challenges in just, I mean, the sheer fact of a joint venture, the sheer fact of local Japanese staff, German executives, you're in the middle, supposedly trying to understand both sides, I guess. So what were some of the things that came up in that situation?
Well, I mean, clearly, joint venture sales ventures are tough anyway because they're set up because you're in the same market and you think there are synergies, and in fact, occasionally you're in a competitive situation. So that was a situation, but also the culture difference is immense. So I think for the German expatriates who were there, it was great because they had the relationship with Germany. The company was a joint venture, was bringing the technology, and the Japanese staff was providing the input to the Japanese customers. But the problem is, despite the German expat Germany communication channel, the Japanese employee customer channel, both were good. The intermixing between the German expatriate and the Japanese staff had to happen in order to communication, because communication only happens when the headquarter and the customer link together, and clearly in this case it wasn't going as smoothly as it should have.
And obviously you're trying to smooth out that communication. So what things were you doing to try and make that work?
Well, first of all, I landed. The contract was signed by headquarters, so I kind of landed as, "Hi, I'm your new boss," and that was caused some little sparks, both for the Japanese staff and the headquarters, the expatriate staff, the delegate staff. So, one recommendation is probably have a better introduction to the situation. So I think getting trust is the most toughest situation, because without trust, you can shout as many orders as you want, but each way have a way to not follow through on, and then they need to understand. And so trust exercised in different manners from Germany and Japanese, and so that was an interesting thing.
And what was different? I mean, if you talk about building trust with the German executives and building trust with the Japanese team, what was different?
I guess this is more maybe stereotyping, which is not good per se, but it helps explain the overall picture. I guess in Germany, one says one thinks. I think that's the cultural norms. While in Japan, there's Honne and Tatemae, and so.
And Honne being the facial, the sort of facing truth, and Tatemae the facing truth, and Honne the real truth. I should say.
What do you think versus what you say, right? And I think Germany is supposed to be the same, and Japanese, clearly it's okay to say both, because everybody knows in Japan is that you need to keep the relationship harmony, while in Germany, I say harmony is exercised through saying what your opinion is. Yeah. So very clearly, very different sets of expectations, and getting used to that was tough, not only for the staff, but for the customers as well.
Oh, okay, so talk a little bit about the customer interaction. How was their reaction to you? You've turned up here, and new guy, and how was that reaction?
So I tried very hard to become very Japanese, because I was very, very conscious that not being Japanese and having studied Japan from the outside, you need to fit in. So I was spending an awful time to become very Japanese. And to cut a quick story short, everybody says don't do that. But the problem is people didn't have the guts to say that until when I became really Japanese and I become a Japanese person, right? And so the reason is I think a lot of people know that if you have an advantage, saying you can identify as a foreigner, and I guess you'd realize that as being a foreigner, you get a certain passage or leeway, a gaijin pass, which is good. But my belief that you can't take the gaijin pass too much, because at the end you are dealing with a Japanese-based organization, which essentially trusts only Japanese at the end, or Japanese mannerisms or traditions, right? So how to balance that was clearly difficult. Except I would say, though, that compared to 20 years ago, there has been a shift in attitude towards, deep inside they still may be very truly traditional, but I think deep inside externally, the communication has been more facilitated considerably more than before. I think.
Okay, so let me just put my glasses back on here because I can't read a damn thing without them anymore. But we did talk about challenges, and you talk about leading is different. So let's talk a little bit about getting engagement, because this is, as you said before, is one of the issues around trust and getting people to want to work hard, that type of thing. So let's talk a little bit about engagement. In my experience, in Gaishke global companies, when you get to the engagement surveys, to the global engagement survey, and then you get the results, and you have the meeting in the, it's usually Singapore or Hong Kong, the sort of APAC hub, and they put up all the results, and APAC's the worst around the whole world. And then within APAC, Japan's got the lowest scores of everyone, and there's all this pressure to get the scores higher. So how have you found things that work to get the engagement higher levels in Japan?
I mean, first of all, it's trust, and I think that's a common thing. But then once you get the fundamental trust, how do you change the situation where you listen versus you actually participate? And I would say once you learn a certain level of trust, then I guess you try to engage in a cultural change, right? I think you can't do both at the same time. And so in our situation, it was essentially, we would have all hands meetings or general smaller meetings where, the leadership is the only one talking. But one interesting anecdote I would say that really happened was there was the tragic earthquake and tsunami and earthquake in the northern part of Japan several years ago. And of course we as being in Tokyo were affected by it, and our employees were affected by it. And so in order to keep operations moving, we had to basically start a daily emergency call in or actual meeting, and to discuss what the issues are, and we always even did some evacuation to the south and keep everybody involved because not everybody could move. But so we kept on doing that, and as things calmed down, we ramped it down to twice a week, to once a week, to once a month, and then we said, let's stop it. To which the employee says, no, let's continue it, and it lasted a year, and basically they felt that they had a need because of the tragedy we had, the earthquake, and the difficulties people had thereafter. But during those sessions, people start talking about other things and business things, and it became a place where people would, we kept the tradition, changed time to do it in the middle of the day, and it was attended by 80% of the people, which is pretty big, pretty good. And then people started actually commenting and wanted to explain their situation or their strategy, and then it became not just all hands for me, but more of a town hall where people who had issues or things they wanted to discuss. So I think that was a very good step forward.
So that sort of came about by chance in a way, didn't it? Because the earthquake, obviously, was very psychologically stressful, physically stressful for a lot of people. And certainly we were having aftershocks, large earthquakes, called aftershocks, but they're a major earthquake in their own right, 6-7 times a day for like months. So it wasn't like the earthquake finished and that was it. It was still ongoing for those of us who stayed. And so I can understand there'd be some, need for, I'm still not through that. But it's interesting how it morphed into more of a communication thing. Yes. What was the sort of communication pattern like for them before that?
It was one way and more focused. And if you really want to get communication, so I spent a lot of time drinking, non-communication, right? And since when I joined, I was in my late 30s, and that was kind of rare to have shacho at that age, and so it was interesting how the younger people invited me out on their dough to go out drinking with them rather than the company money, and so that was an interesting thing. So which means that the young people actually wanted to communicate, right? And so they communicate in a different manner. So I think every company has its own culture of communication or its blockages in communication, but you need to find, once you find that, you can start infiltrating and kind of building trust at that level, and the young people talk to each other all the time. So the communication, the unofficial communication in Japanese companies is superb, I think. So if you can tap into that, make it a more corporate thing and kind of shake off this, this communication channel as a silo buster, that could also become very helpful.
Were they continuing something that had been going on with the previous president, where they'd invite them to come out and have drinks, or this is new for you?
It was new for me.
And why do you think they did that? I mean, that's quite, in a way, they're really stepping out and taking a bit of a risk in a way, aren't they?
Yeah.
What do you think was driving that?
Because I guess imagine that they heard of my reputation of being as a kind of a more international, laid-back guy, I guess. but I think what showed up at the end was, and we identified this later in some of the exercise we have, is the middle management tends to be kind of squeezed, and the middle management, the kacho area or the kakaricho section heads. Turned out in our cases be a large blockage point. Not the fact because they wanted to block, but I think some of them felt that there was a disconnect between the staff and the management. And this is where I would say that when we start off in, typical to manage a staff, we had 2-3 year plans, and every time we kick it off, explain it. The more we did about 4 or 5 of them, and I think the later it got more successful. I think they were all very important, but the engagement became successful later because we identified that I think the middle management was kind of stuck. Yeah, and not stuck particularly because of their fault. I would say there was probably the senior management issue that maybe didn't pay enough attention to that communication. Because at the senior staff meetings, we were all gung-ho. This is a great strategy. Hey, we're going to win this marketplace. And then, when we started realizing that the echo back didn't happen from the staff when we had this thing, there's a blockade somewhere. And we start looking into that, and we kind of find that clearly the middle management level were in a rut, trying to help. Kind of how they were probably not coached enough how to spread the message to their staff when they got it from the senior staff, right? At least in our case. And so we addressed that through more training, as well as more engagement. And then I think what topped it off is once you get to a certain level, then you can decide that the direction for the next 5 years at the top, but you need to also engage with the staff level. I mean, it sounds obvious, but it's less obvious than do it. And then because what it means from the top staff and what it means to the daily job of the staff level is totally different. So given a very clear example, the finance people thought that it was the job of the finance accounting guys to stop making the sales guys spend too much money in entertainment. So there was a serious battle going on. Says this is too much for lunch, or this is too much for dinner. And what happened at the end is, kind of long story short, was when they got together and after the top manager said we want to go here, what they had to do is because the sales guys are not there to spend money because they have family as well. They want to get the best quickly results, and then even that saying they got to go out to dinner with their customers, they're spending time away so we need to help them and remove these barriers, and then they start developing a approval system which is much quicker than the previous one. And the previous one was blocking because of me, because I was always the one in the office to stamp the hanko.
Oh, okay.
So they took me out of the loop, and this was actually came from the finance group, which I thought was extraordinary.
So the finance group said, okay, this bureaucratic system of getting your Hanko chop seal on the official approval process is slowing the whole thing down. Let's just take you out of it.
Yeah.
And we'll take over that
Yeah.
accountability, which is, that's quite innovative, isn't it?
And then that is, they're not the police, the expense police there, but they're more to help enable the salesman get more face time with the customer, I think.
Yeah, that was great.
That was cool, I thought.
Yeah. And it's interesting how you talk about the middle management being the blocker. They suck up all the information coming from above, but they tend not to be very parsimonious about sending it down the line.
Yeah.
And often the why of what's going on is not transmitted. As you say, the communication issues, the why is understood at the top level, but not necessarily grasped at the bottom level.
Yes, and I think it's essentially the top issue because they haven't explained enough. Because we always say that we need to be careful on where the information goes. So I think there's a belief that we shouldn't push all the information out because there's a feel of spillage. But unless you tell people what we're doing this for in understandable terms, it's never, it's not going to be effective. So I think the key thing is push as much information as possible out, unless it's strictly confidential and don't mention it, right? So, and that culture, it's a cultural thing of how you treat information and how you hold yourself responsible, right? And I think one of the issues we had as a company, we had too many rules.
Oh, okay.
And at one point, there were so many corporate rules, even the senior management had no idea what the corporate rules were. And so there was an effort, even from headquarters, to reduce the number of corporate rules and basically have lighthouse ideas saying, you're supposed to help your colleague, general direction where you're going, have your compass and make your own, make sure you don't jump off the cliff, simple rules like that, and then let the team act on itself, right? I mean, it takes time to get from a very bureaucratic state to that level, but certainly once you get to that, it's possible. And it's even possible in Japan, I would say.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. Japan's interesting to me in the sense of getting innovation. Now, people think that traditionally Japan was a country skilled at copying, and yes, for a long time they were doing that, but they also became very innovative in the 70s and 80s and 90s. Although today we often hear that companies are hoping for greater innovation from the teams, but they complain that the team members themselves are very reluctant to step out of their comfort zone because they worry about making a mistake. Japan is, in my view anyway, a no-mistake culture. So innovation by its nature is messy and there's bound to be mistakes. So how did you find balancing this sort of fear of making a mistake, therefore stay nicely comfortable in your comfort zone, with trying to get innovation in the business?
Good question. Next question, please. No, it's a very, very good point. But I think it fundamentally comes down to corporate governance, I would believe. And why do I say corporate government? Maybe it's kind of too macro, but I think it has is a certain element to truth because And corporate governance in the Western societies means that it's shareholder value that need to be increasing, and maybe it's going too much to the end, but there's too little that a lot of people say in Japan. What does that mean? Is you're seeing a lot of issues in corporate, and you see presidents being fired, not fired in an American sense, but being removed because of illicit or non-traditional accounting methodologies. One of the issues is people's relationship with employment in Japan is somewhat different from the West, and where I think in the West you're even in Germany, where your job is protected, you need to bring value, and you're promoted once you can establish that you bring value to your particular set of circumstances. Being by values, it could be monetary, it could be technical, that you're actually increasing your output in a certain sense. I think in Japan, and this was great back in the heydays where it was good, essentially to keep the people together when things were going. Economy was driving, so keep loyalty. That situation has considerably changed, right? And so some of the companies which are having trouble is trying to unlearn what they've learned. And as you know, in Japan, you have a tradition of rotation every 3 years or so, right? And so you have a lot of specialists of the company, but as well as you don't have new blood. And it's great because when you want to do something new, they send employees to learn these things. And I think in the past you could do that, but now you have to buy the expertise, which means that you got to buy companies, or you got to recruit people. As you know, labor mobility is still not very high. I mean, in gaishikes, like foreign caps, that's high, but actually when you look at the pool of people, it's very small. Although with the labor shortage, it's becoming different. However, there's still an issue where you need to pay for that performance, and that hasn't really caught up yet. I think so that you need to find the proper balance and change the mentality, because if you're there to protect the company, you need new ideas, and if you have nobody else from no new ideas coming in, and as you know in Japan, when new grads come in, they go through a very rigorous training, but it's also a bit of brainwashing to fit the culture of the company. So, someone who may have being innovative have lost the intuition to be innovative and to follow the company path more than become innovative. So that's the fundamental problem. How do you break that? Well. This may sound strange, but I basically told people is you need to understand what your value in the company is, and by knowing that, it'll make your job easier rather than just asking for your boss for instructions. Because if you know what your value is and where your value adding to the whole chain of the company, then you should be able to know what you're doing. And so, but I also said that by adding value to yourselves, you're making yourself more valuable, and valuable being to the external market. And so, and this may be a little bit daring, but I told them, if we can't keep you interested once you increase your value to us, and if we can't keep you interested in keeping you aboard, then we have a problem on the management side. I told them that several times, and some people picked up and some people didn't. But I think, when we get people from traditional Japanese company, a lot of people struggle because they listen to their boss. But then they come in and they struggle as well because, in Japan, you struggle with a bad boss, but you can hang in there for 3 years and then your boss will probably change. In Japan, it's not the case. In foreign caps, it's not the case. So we would bring in new people, and they struggle at the first because they do what their boss tells them rather than to develop a network matrix, right? And this is where I think what big difference is foreign cap companies that work in a matrix. Japan still works in a top-down methodology. So I think teaching people to make their own decisions without being fully instructed to the last T is something which is critical. That means taking risk and taking inputs from two different people who are not necessarily fighting but have a different view, let's say sales and marketing, and make your best decision as to which is the best decision for the company.
So in terms of numbers, how many people were at Infineon?
When I took it over, so I can't go into details, but it was about 100, and I think now it's over 200.
So it's a pretty reasonably sized company.
It's
I'm not asking for numbers on revenues, but you just...
I can tell you that because
okay,
we always say that
how much dough is Infineon turning over?
When we started, it was about 150, and now I would say it's now beyond $1 billion.
Oh, wow, in Japan.
Yeah, and then, there's been a lot of natural growth, but as well as, I would say, put it this way.
So you've taken from 150 million to over $1 billion in the 17 years you were there?
Well, less than $1 billion, but now it's probably $1 billion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we call that a gimme in golf, so we'll give you the billion.
Yeah, okay.
But that's phenomenal for growth, isn't it, in that period of time?
No. And I think that one good thing is Japan, obviously, of course, the team in Japan helped a lot, but I would say that Infineon was a great company in the sense that they once they recognized the strength of the region, they actually used that and are open to learning from their mistakes, or open to learn from the customers in the regions. And that's another thing is, if you have that in corporate headquarters, and of course you need to educate, I would say, the corporate headquarters as to how things work. And if that works, then you get more leeway in operating the way you think you need to do in Japan.
And that's often a struggle, isn't it, for execs here who are reporting back to headquarters in another country with a completely different culture, different business culture. And trying to explain Japan to headquarters is always a bit difficult. How did you go about explaining Japan to headquarters?
Well, I think that's my fortune. I had 17 years to make a lot of mistakes and explain them and apologize several times. So, but you need to have a constant thing. So, I mean, one of the big mistakes would be to send an executive over for 3 years, and because the executives are expats are expensive, they can usually only have they have term limits of 3 or 4 years. It's very difficult to understand and churn around, and you bring a family over, your family and yourself getting used to it, and then towards the end you need to start looking for a job when you get back home. So in effect, you're only useful for a year or two, and so that's a challenge some of the expat people face. It's not everybody the same thing, but I think that's one of the challenges when you send let's say a novice to Japan, I would say.
And I've asked you a number of things. There's something I've missed, you think, I could ask you about leadership in Japan that we haven't touched on?
I think, a lot of people talk about the lack of leadership in Japan. And I agree to that Western, from a Western perspective, that is true. But I think there are certain good elements of Japanese culture, which means that there's been very little corporate greed, right? Maybe there should be more, but when you have these missed issues or financial misdeeds, there's usually nobody pocketing a huge bunch of money and running away, right? And which is unlike some other countries. So I think honesty is a key strength in Japan. How do you convert that to more innovativism and more entrepreneurialism? I don't know, right? But I think there's a good foundation to build business, which is trust and honesty. How do you equate that to taking more risk? I guess everybody has their own way, and that's probably the rough part, the most difficult part to find a solution for.
Anything else we could have talked about?
I don't know. I mean, this is a good place to be. I mean, everything works. Food's great.
Yep.
And what can I say?
Well, it's got rule of law. things work, as you say, and generally speaking, there is a place for gate companies and people, coming from those countries to staff them to make a difference here. So there is an opportunity to make a career in Japan, certainly. You've certainly made a great career in Japan.
I still hope to bring some more to Japan, and I think.
What are you doing these days? You've retired from Infineon,
yes.
but you're not playing golf or playing, going to Hawaii or something. You're actually still beavering away. What are you doing?
Beavering away. So I looking at everybody say AI and big data, and I was always interested in it because we're certainly kind of involved in that where automotive driving, or autonomous driving in the automotive world, where Infineon is a serious play in that with radar technologies and LiDAR technologies, but more and more is in the car is going to be driven by software and artificial intelligence as well as big data crunching. And so I've helping companies analyze factory data, which is usually a little bit messy because they're all old equipment, new equipment from different manufacturers. There are no standards. But what I clearly is that big data and good data analytics can actually relieve so much of the problems of quality and efficiency that it's incredible. It's an incredible, powerful tool to have. Here we have a challenge because of the Japanese organization decision-making thing. Because AI is so complex, there's very little understanding in the traditional management style companies, and yet this is not just a technology thing. It is a organizational change thing. Because if you start using AI, it's not going to get rid of jobs, but it's going to enhance different jobs in different ways. It's going to change the organization structure. And this is where Japan is very, very weak at in terms of I think, making deliberate organizational change to suit the technology versus organizations which are there to serve.
So where would you identify the weakness? What's the weakness?
Well, what has been Japan's strength, at least in manufacture, could become weaknesses. For example, Industry 4.0 was a weapon, I think, for Germany to modernize the industry. And what I think the clear key thing was they basically digitized manufacturing. And why digital manufacturing is key is knowledge transfer becomes more easy, right? And knowledge transfer takes years if you do it the human way. You have the Meister who's there, who then has to teach it over, and takes decades to do that. But if you can digitize it, then, of course, the Meister no longer gets to develop the kid, but the kid or the new younger person gets to use that know-how stored in a different technology in different ways, and probably more powerful ways. In Japan, you have the Gemba, which is one of the best, and I think Industry 4.0 in a certain way says that was for Germany to overtake Japan because Japanese Gemba and the German Gemba are both competing edge.
So Gemba means the
factory floor, the factory floor,
yeah.
And so, but right now the Gemba is so strong that there is a little bit of a reluctance to go digital. But what's becoming clearer that is these people are getting older and there are less and less workers that the digitization needs to happen. So I think they're trying to digitize quicker, but they're taking a long delay. But they need to make fast decisions, and fast decisions are not the strength of traditional corporate Japanese mechanisms. And here you see a lot of other worlds where the CEO actually takes a more active role when he takes his shirt sleeves up and goes on a factory floor. You never see that happening in Japan. It's more of a kind of a ceremonial role when they do that. But you see more and more senior managers really go into the factory floor and talk with the operators and kind of figure out and say that digital change is necessary, and then I'm here to drive that change. I think that kind of change management is probably going to be more necessary in Japan in the future.
Well, Yasuaki Mori-san, that has been fascinating conversation about leadership, and also the extra bonus there of talking about AI and Japan's future with AI. Thank you very much for joining me today on the Leadership Japan Series podcast.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.